They thought they'd escaped the violence. John and Joan Stirling had left behind the gangs of Nottingham, hoping to start again in a quiet seaside village. But the past wasn't done with them. This is not just a story about gangland justice, it's about police failure, fear, and the chilling reach of organised crime. It's about one of the most shocking contract killings in modern UK history. Today's story focuses on a small village, Trusthorpe. It's in Lincolnshire on the east coast of England, about 150 miles northeast of London and 40 or miles so east of Lincoln. If you've been there, you'll know it's a really quiet, sleepy place. When we pick up the story in the summer of 2004, Joan Stirland, a 53-year-old cancer nurse, had lived there for about 8 months with her husband, 55-year-old John, who had previously worked in a textile factory. They were seen by neighbours as a lovely, quiet couple who very much kept themselves to themselves. And except for Joan's visits to the local bingo club, they didn't go out much. Sunday, the 8th of August, was a blazing hot summer's day. It was just after 2 pm when a black Volkswagen Passat stopped outside their home. Two men wearing boiler suits and baseball caps got out, leaving the hazard lights flashing. Moments later, the men emerged from the bungalow and drove off, leaving the door of the home ajar. It was 7 hours later when police arrived at the house, and inside they found the two dead bodies of John and Joan Stirland. John had been shot 6 times. His wife was shot 4 times. It was an execution. Just what had led to this double murder at such a quiet seaside location? The police investigation took them back to 2001, when John, Joan, and their 22-year-old son, Michael O'Brien, all lived in the city of Nottingham, although they didn't live together at the time. O'Brien had been in trouble with police, as had those he'd hung about with. And that year, a friend of O'Brien's, a 32-year-old bodybuilder called Gary Salmon, was sent to prison for causing actual bodily harm when he violently attacked a man who owed money for drugs to O'Brien. It wasn't Salmon's first time in the slammer. He'd been in there before with O'Brien when they'd committed a robbery together. On his release, Salmon continued to make dangerous enemies. And at the start of August 2001, Salmon was standing outside his home when a man emerged from a van and shot at him 3 times. Luckily for him, he survived this attempt on his life. A few weeks later, the two pals, Salmon and O'Brien, were out drinking in some of the bars in Nottingham city centre. When O'Brien was turned away from Obsessions nightclub by a bouncer on the door, due to wearing trainers and a tracksuit, fair enough, right? He formed his fingers into the shape of a gun and told the bouncer he would come back with a gun and shoot him dead or in the chest. Nice. The two men went back to O'Brien's home where they smoked cannabis and drank champagne. Then Salmon got word there was a late night lock-in at another venue, the Sporting Chance Club. The two men headed over, but again they were unsuccessful, being blocked on the door. There was a scuffle, and O'Brien was left with a nasty cut on his face after being hit with an object which he thought might have been an ashtray. This was, he believed, caused by an 18-year-old man, Jamie Gunn. That surname Gunn may well be familiar to you, as the Gunn family are infamous in the Nottingham criminal fraternity. And in 2004, the gang run by Colin Gunn, the Bestwood Cartel, was running a large-scale crime operation which spanned money lending, burglaries, extortion, robbery, drugs, car ringing, and fraud. Colin Gunn was known to enforce his leadership with extreme violence. As leader of the Nottingham-based gang, Colin Gunn was a big unit. He was a powerful man, and he drove a Porsche with a registration plate that read Power. He was thought to have been involved in at least 4 murders and more than 50 shootings, but he hadn't been charged with a single crime since 1998. Colin Gunn was at the height of his powers, and to him and to his followers, he was invincible. But despite the reputation of the Gunn family name, O'Brien seemingly didn't care about this at all. He was livid about what had happened, and he wanted revenge. A little later, back at the Sporting Chance bar, 4 men left the pub and got into a Renault Laguna car. Driving this car was 22-year-old Marvin Bradshaw. He was a hard-working, well-liked shop fitter who lived locally. He wasn't involved in crime in any way at all. Also in the car sat Jamie Gunn. He and Marvin, they'd been mates since they were toddlers, having both grown up on the Bestwood estate in Nottingham. At just after 4 a.m., as the car edged out of the car park, Jamie Gunn, who was sitting in the back seat, saw two dark figures with balaclavas approach the car, and he instinctively ducked his head. A single shot pierced the night, and Marvin Bradshaw, the driver, hit in the head, slumped sideways. Marvin drifted in and out of consciousness until the police and paramedics arrived. Covered in his friend's blood, Jamie held on to Marvin until help arrived, watching him fight for his life. But tragically, Marvin died afterwards in hospital. If, as expected, this was a revenge attack by O'Brien and Salmon, it was a race for the police to find them before the Bestwood cartel did. Salmon went to ground, but O'Brien, he was quickly arrested. His mum, Joan, didn't think that her son was guilty. She thought he'd been set up, and she made this clear to anyone at all who would listen. She knew all about the Gunn family and their reputation, but she ignored the threats she received. However, 5 days after the murder, two men on a motorbike stopped outside her house just after 10 p.m. and they fired shots through the front window. It was terrifying. Her husband John dragged Joan to the ground and safety. But John and Joan couldn't believe what had happened, and they moved out that very day, leaving all of their belongings behind. On the same day, an imitation grenade was thrown through the window of Salmon's house, and his girlfriend's property was firebombed. The message was pretty clear. As you can see, the Gunn family and their cartel weren't the sort of people you mess about with. Joan and John Stirland were offered places in the witness protection scheme, but they turned it down. One of the reasons was because it was known just how much the Bestwood cartel had infiltrated the police force, and they didn't feel safe. But they also knew that if they became a part of this scheme, they'd have to change their identities, and they'd completely lose contact with friends and family, which they didn't want to do. The Sterlands moved first to Bridlington on the Yorkshire coast, then to Goole, and by December, they'd settled in a bungalow in Trusthorpe. Meanwhile, back in Nottingham at the city's Crown Court, their son O'Brien was in court accused of the murder of Marvin Bradshaw. His defence was that his pal Salmon alone had been responsible for the killing. His defence team pointed out that O'Brien had never been convicted of an offence involving a firearm, while Salmon had stashed a shotgun in his cupboard because of an ongoing dispute with members of the local underworld. Salmon had also drawn further suspicion by going on the run immediately after the shooting, whereas O'Brien had stayed in Nottingham. But the jury didn't believe his story, and they found him guilty. This led to some quite shocking scenes in court. We've heard of quite a few on this channel, but this is pretty much as bad as it gets, I think. When the jury announced their unanimous verdict, an unrepentant O'Brien flew into a rage, and he directed his aggression at Marvin Bradshaw's family in the public seats. He threw a cup of water at his relatives, and he shouted to Marvin's devastated family, "I'm not bothered, I'm a bad boy. Your son looked like a donut with a big hole in his head. I don't care." That's just utterly outrageous behaviour, isn't it? No respect. Sentencing O'Brien, who had a 6-year-old son, to a minimum of 24 years in prison, he said, "Having been hit by an ashtray, you armed yourself with a single-barreled shotgun. I've no doubt you told your friends that you were going to shoot a man. You went back and shot a wholly innocent man in the back of the head. I've no doubt at all you meant to kill him. This was a calculated and deliberate murder." But even after this, still O'Brien showed no remorse, and he barked back, "I would do that sentence standing on my head." The shattered family of Marvin Bradshaw spoke of their relief at the conviction, but they said they would never recover from the horrific death of Marvin, adding, "Because of the actions of Michael O'Brien, our son is dead. What he did caused our family immense misery. O'Brien murdered Marvin, an innocent man, in the most horrific way imaginable. He didn't even know Marvin's name when he shot him dead. The fact that he shot the man is no consolation to us. However long he spends in prison, it will never put right the evil he committed. And it was 2.5 years later that Salmon was also tracked down, and in 2007, he was too sent to prison for his part in the murder of Marvin Bradshaw. During his evidence, Salmon denied the gun used to kill Marvin was his. He said that O'Brien produced it from a bag, but the jury didn't believe him, and they returned a verdict of guilty. He went to prison for 18 years before he would be considered for parole. With the two killers in prison, let's go back to Jamie Gunn, who, as you recall, had been in the car with Marvin Bradshaw and had been the intended victim. Although Jamie was physically unhurt in the attack, he took the death of his close friend incredibly badly. His friends and family were worried that he was in self-destruct mode and he no longer cared about what happened to him. He wasn't eating, he was taking lots of drugs, drinking heavily. As you know, this can affect the immune system, and Jamie started to get sick. The conviction of O'Brien gave him some comfort, but 3 weeks after the trial finished on the 2nd of August, Jamie Gunn was found dead in his mum's bed by two younger siblings. The official cause of death given for 21-year-old Jamie was pneumonia. His mum, Julie, described his reaction to the death of his friend Marvin, saying, "It was indescribable. He was screaming and crying, he just couldn't believe it." A steep decline had begun. Jamie held Marvin in his arms after being shot. "I think he may as well have died then too," she said. And Jamie left behind a son, not even aged 6 months. Although O'Brien had been sentenced to life, Colin Gunn was angry about his lack of respect he'd shown in court. And when Jamie too died, Gunn decided that someone would have to pay for what had happened, and he would take his revenge on O'Brien's parents, Joan and John Stirland. Gunn wasn't short of contacts, and he arranged for a former BT worker to find the couple's address. He also had insiders working within the police force who helped him. At around 10:30 p.m. on Saturday the 7th of August 2005, the day before the murder of John and Joan, a neighbour of the Sterlands noticed a man lurking by their front door. It didn't appear serious enough to make a big fuss that evening, but the next morning the neighbour did let Joan know what she had seen. Joan was concerned enough to ring the police in Nottinghamshire, and just before 2 p.m. the next day, the day that Joan and John were murdered, an officer called her back to discuss the report. The police were clear that in the call, although Joan was concerned, she was not in a state of panic at all, and her priority was to inform them, and she didn't want the police arriving in large numbers, which would have alarmed her neighbours in the quiet street. This information was passed to Lincolnshire police. But the couple didn't receive a visit from Lincolnshire police until 9:30 p.m, but by then, they were both dead, and it was the police officer who found the bodies. Detectives suspected the involvement of Gunn all along, but the key to the investigation was phone evidence, which linked Gunn to the two Nottingham men who they believed had carried out the murders, 29-year-old John Russell and 19-year-old Michael McNee. Mobile phone analysis showed that Colin Gunn had made 5 separate trips to the area the day before the killings, taking with him various members of his gang. Call records showed he had left the area by 10:30 p.m, but one of the others, John Russell, stayed in the village. And this is the time that the prowler was noted by the Sterlands' neighbours. This person was likely to have been Russell. The burner phone used by the two men to communicate with Gunn had been bought in Woolworths in Skegness, and when police found evidence of that transaction at 6:47 a.m. on the 4th of August, they were able to tie it to Colin Gunn, who'd paid for it by cash and was caught on CCTV at around the same time. Quite an amateur mistake, isn't it, for such a serious criminal? Detectives also found a SIM card belonging to another of Gunn's phones, and this contained evidence of calls between him and the other two men at key times. This SIM card had been given to an associate of Gunn's in Nottingham, but this person had failed to dispose of it properly. Again, basic errors. Following the murder, the two men escaped in a black Passat, which was burnt out, and they were then picked up by Colin Gunn in a different vehicle, who took them back to Nottingham to dispose of the phones. But this was tracked by CCTV. The three men were charged and appeared in front of a jury at Birmingham Crown Court. All faced conspiracy to murder charges rather than murder, as it couldn't be proved conclusively who had pulled the trigger. The prosecution argued this was a well-planned, well-organised operation, and yet more mobile phone evidence was damning, as it put the two accused men very close to the Sterlands' home in the hours leading up to the double murder. Their DNA was also found at a nearby caravan, which was being used by the gang as a kind of murder HQ. During the trial, Russell protested his innocence, claiming that he and McNeil were actually babysitting consignment of amphetamines, which were hidden in a beach chalet. "I'm a petty criminal, not a murderer," he said. In March 2006, the jury came back with their verdict and all three men guilty. Colin Gunn was told he would spend at least 35 years in prison. Michael McNeil was jailed for at least 25 years, and John Russell was sent to prison for 30 years. The judge described Gunn as a dominating leader of others, telling him, "You are a crook, a villain, and a large-scale drug dealer. You are the leader of this criminal gang. To your gang, your word was law." Now, Colin Gunn, he wasn't used to being spoken to like this, and he reacted angrily to the jury's guilty verdict. He turned to them menacingly and said, "Thank you, you scumbags. I hope you die of cancer." He then directed his anger at the judge, calling him a paedophile, before he was removed from court. And finally, we need to return to where we began with the Sterlands. You've probably been wondering, as I did, why they weren't offered better protection from police. The Independent Police Complaints Commission did look into this case, and they found that the Nottinghamshire force was found to have organisationally failed, and communication between the two forces was poor. But they concluded it was impossible to say whether the killings could have been prevented if the officers had acted any differently. It did find 7 Nottinghamshire officers had been in breach of regulations relating to performance of duties, but stressed their failings had not amounted to serious misconduct. And of course, as always in these situations, some of those officers managed to retire before they faced accountability for their actions. So there we have it. Oh, and one last thing. Michael O'Brien has now admitted killing Jamie Gunn from behind bars, but he's due out of prison very soon if he isn't already. I wonder how concerned he should be for his safety, or if the violence we've heard about today has now finished. Thank you so much for watching this video today. I hope you found it of interest. If so, please do watch one of my others. Until next time, I've been Adam Lloyd.